Hello, welcome back. I hope you're really well. I have recently been sketching out some of the characters from Strange Magic and trying to learn how to draw them and capture their likeness, doing some sort of justice to their wonderful character designs. Now, if you don't know about this movie, Strange Magic is a Lucasfilm that was released in 2015, and from what I can tell, it seemed like quite a passion project. It's been on my mind for the last couple of years to make some sort of art or video to put out into the world for a little bit more love for this movie, since I think it's quite underrated. It really didn't do very well when it came out as far as movie reviews, ratings and making money. And I can think of a few reasons why. It is a jukebox musical, so people either love or hate that kind of thing generally. And I think it's a movie that needs to be taken quite lightheartedly. It is, I would say, somewhat experimental and like they were just having fun making it. Now, my journey of coming to like this movie actually started quite a long time ago. I suppose around about when it first came out. I was a teenager, quite obsessed with fairies, but not very internet savvy or very aware that I could look up these movies or find other ways to watch them. I quite relied on what DVDs I could find in store or what my parents let me watch. And I remember seeing it on TV very briefly, a few of the fairy scenes. I think it was one of the first songs, Can't Help Falling in Love with You. And I was quite enamored by the look of it and the storyline and the fact that they were animated fairies. And I remember saying, hey, can we turn the channel back? I want to watch that. And it was, oh, no, you wouldn't like that, or something along those lines. And I was a bit confused, but I think I just dropped it then and never heard about it again until I think it was about 2020 when I first watched the whole thing through. I saw it on Disney Plus, I think, and recognized it as that movie that I never got to see. And I watched it by myself, so I didn't really have anyone to give me warning not to take it too seriously or bounce my ideas off of. And I wasn't really expecting it to be a musical, that the characters would break into songs so often. I suppose I really was expecting something a little more ethereal and dreamy and not so funny. I might have thought differently about it if I had gone in expecting not to take it too seriously, something more like Shrek. But as it was, all the jokes and sort of comical musical moments went over my head. Now, the characters in this movie have a very distinct, stylized and yet realistic look, so every time I've tried to draw them in the past it's really failed, so I decided to play it safe and stick with drawing Marianne and Dawn. The other characters are of course brilliant as well, but I knew it would be too ambitious and intimidating to try and draw them. So I'm sticking with the more iconic fairy type girls in this movie. And after sketching them for a while, I felt somewhat confident that I could make a little painting that I was happy with. So this is me laying down my paper to start that artwork. Now, I believe it was a few months after I had first watched it by myself that I invited my brother to join me in a watch of it. We like to watch movies together that are good and bad, because the bad ones you can make fun of. And we had a lot of laughs making fun of the movie and cringing at some of the musical moments, because once again, I think we both were not watching it with the right expectations. And he dislikes musicals a lot more than I do. So yeah, we had a fun time and then came away a bit disappointed because it looked absolutely beautiful, of course, and the animation was wonderful and the lighting and the costumes. But we were really just ruined by our expectations going in, which I think weren't too unreasonable. When there's a whimsical fantasy fairy-like goblin movie, you don't usually expect them to be breaking out into all these songs that we know very well. And there's just a bit of disappointment then that a movie you thought looked amazing and had potential didn't really meet your expectations. Now, you see, I wasn't kidding when I said it took me a long time to come around with this movie. A year later, I looked at him and I said, hey, you know that movie? You know the one? And he said, no, let's not watch, we can't watch it again. And I'm like, come on, just for another laugh, let's watch that silly old movie again. So we sit down to watch, and this time we laughed more at the jokes rather than at the movie. And there was a newfound appreciation for the style. And, actually the plot was pretty good. And by the end of it, we were looking at each other kind of, when you've gone into it and you both agree that you don't like something, but then I kind of enjoyed that a bit. That was not, some parts I kind of liked, and it was this slow coming out of it, realizing this movie wasn't as bad as we thought, and you just had to maybe take it in a different way. Then over the next while, I remember bringing up certain moments and jokes from the movie to laugh about, and I recall him pausing a lot to look at specific shots and the beautifully designed armor. Then soon after, I bought the DVD, and it was still a little bit of a joke, but hey, look, I got the DVD finally. And then not too long after that, it was pretty clear that we just honestly loved the film in a non-ironic way. I spent a long time on this sketch because I was very particular about having these two ladies look like themselves, but interpreted in my own style. I finally got them to a point where I was quite satisfied in how they looked. Now, I am not a movie reviewer, and I don't think I've ever really written book or movie reviews, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I haven't really researched or thought logically about everything I'm saying, they're just my opinions. But I'll just talk about a few things I really loved about the movie. Not only was a lot of time and effort clearly put into the animating, the lighting, and the character models, but the very realistic and somewhat gritty style they lent towards is very refreshing, especially watching it nowadays compared to a lot of movies that are currently being made, where the style is certainly a lot softer, squishy looking. Now, of course, this is just down to preference, but I do think a lot of newer movies tend to lose this idea of making our characters really characterful and maybe being more discerning between what characters need what features. For example, nothing wrong with big eyes and soft round faces, but maybe that would better portray a young innocent character like Dawn in this movie. And then maybe our more villainous or scary characters could have sharper, more angular features, or a colour palette that's not so vibrant. I've noticed this particularly in Barbie movies, where in a lot of the later ones, even our scary villain characters are pretty and cute and round and soft and pink. Now, sometimes this is a choice, but in these cases it seems more like they're going for a cuter look with the whole movie and then just throwing everything into this blanket rule for style, which maybe makes it more marketable, but I don't think creates enough difference and interests for characters within the movies. I also really appreciated that they made our fairies seem like fairies and the goblins like goblins, and didn't give them all such human characteristics. The fairies certainly are more humanoid than the goblins, but even them, they have these very long limbs, long thin fingers. A lot of the elves had less fingers, 2 or 3, pointy ears for everyone, and just a strong sense that you were really escaping into another world where the creatures didn't look different from us just because of their wings, but it was infused into a lot of elements of their character design. Also, a really good size for the fairy's wings. I feel like I'm also guilty of not painting my fairy wings large enough sometimes, but there's a certain size I refuse to go smaller than, because even if there's the excuse of magic, it just doesn't look right for very tiny wings to be supporting a fairy, in my opinion. Sometimes I think it's nicer even for a fairy to have no wings, like the Sugar Plum Fairy in this movie, and we can really lean into the idea that it's just magic keeping her floating around. Now, I haven't really researched this, and I don't know the stories well enough to proclaim this as true, but there's got to be some influence from Shakespeare in here. I'm thinking definitely The Midsummer Night's Dream, and I even thought there was some crossovers with The Taming of the Shrew, but I might be reaching a little far for that one. Either way, the aesthetic of this movie and the fact that a lot of it was moonlit and in the dark forest really appealed to me. I also thought we had a good representation of the different kinds of fairies we always see in fairy folklore. The good fairies, bad fairies, the goblins, the Seelie and the unseelie court. And there was also the impressions of fairy mischief with the imp spreading the potion around. And a very important theme with fairies, which is vanity and beauty being of great importance to them. Another movie that I love, which has similar representation of our fairy creatures, is Epic. We've got the Leafmen, the good guys with their life of the forest, and then on the other side you've got the Boggans with their rot and decay. Now, I love both of these movies and I think they have very different feels to them, and I wouldn't change a thing about either, but if I could make a third new movie and combine my favourite elements of both, it would have all the realism and gritty characters of Strange Magic, with maybe more of a quiet, ethereal mystery to the plot. So as I've said, I really like the design in this movie, especially the fairies with their proportions, their clothes, the colours. And it's become quite an inspiration for my art over the last few years, so I thought it was about time I drew a few of the characters for myself, and I really like how this painting turned out. I wanted to draw something sweet, sisterly, and symbolic in its shapes, so I loved this idea of having them very close with their hands pressed together, and something I figured out later, which was quite unintentional, is that from far away, the character silhouettes is that of a butterfly, a singular butterfly with the two different coloured wings, and then upon looking closer you realise just the two fairies' profile when they're up close together. So I don't know if this has been done a lot before, but I think this style of posing would make a great commission. If you want me to turn you and a loved one or sister or friend into this butterfly silhouette where it's the two of you as fairies, let me know, because I think that would be a very charming commission to paint. I've talked to some people recently online who seem to share my opinions that this movie is great and quite underrated. If you are unconvinced or have always disliked this movie, fair enough, I understand. As you can see, it took me a long time to come around. And I'm not saying that you would, maybe you would dislike it forever, but if you're looking for a sign to give it another watch, maybe this is it. And my advice would be to not take the movie or the characters or the music too seriously, and maybe you'll find it fun. And just all around, I love this movie. I do think there are a couple snippets of music that could be removed because they veer on the side of telling, not showing. I know it was a long time for me to talk about one movie, but I clearly had some thoughts I wanted to communicate, so I thought I would make this whole video dedicated to me sharing my thoughts on Strange Magic. Now, right at the end, as I was peeling off my tape, I noticed some tiny spots of paint that I wanted to remove. And making the biggest mistake ever, I grabbed my paper towel after dabbing the paper with some water, and I wiped it on there, and I didn't realize there was black ink on it, so I got this mark. And this was after me rubbing it and trying to get it off. There was still a subtle marking of this beige color in the corner, which becomes very obvious with a pristine white background. But the next day, it all sorted itself out. I decided to go in with some cream-colored paint and very lightly splash it around all over. And I actually really like the way this came out. It makes the little mark barely noticeable at all and gives the painting more of a rustic look, like it was made on an old parchment type paper. And here they are, the fairy sisters, Marianne and Dawn. It really was quite an easy, simple painting, but I did take my time on it because I had a very clear vision in mind. This painting is up for sale in my shop, the link is down below. Thanks for coming along and watching me paint and listening to all that. If you have any similar or different thoughts about the movie, I would love to hear about them. And I hope you have a beautiful end to this season and stay happy and inspired. Goodbye!